FPL Game Week 4 transfer targets. In today's video, we're going to go through some players you are considering buying into your team. We'll also talk about some of the hot topic players who might be looking like they're good assets, but their fixtures are not great. Some players that lots of players are selling that maybe you should hold on to, like Alexander Isak and Bukayo Saka as well. We're going to go through all of that, what players you should be buying and maybe who should be selling going into FPL Game Week 4. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new to the channel as well. Thank you all very much for joining, and today we are having a look at some transfer targets, players you should be considering buying into your FPL teams as well this week. As always, these videos taken all the data from the Fantasy Football Scout members area and from the app as well. If you are interested in getting the data, doing player comparisons, reading articles from managers, all yourself on the app or online, do check out the link in the description. They are currently still offering 40% off, but it is going to be ending soon as well. We're going to start off by actually discussing a few players, whether you should be holding on to them, not players that you should be buying, but players that people own that you should maybe be considering selling this week, and actually are some of the most sold players going into game week 4. First of all is Bukayo Saka. Now, Arsenal are likely to be without both Declan Rice and now Martin Odegaard as well, who looks like he's picked up an injury for the next game. Of course, Rice will then be back, but we don't know the length of injury that we will see for Martin Odegaard. Bukayo Saka is not a priority sell. Bukayo Saka is not a player you need to sell. The only reason I think you should be selling Saka is if you are going to be buying Mo Salah for free. I don't think Saka to Mo Salah is the transfer that I've made already this week is worth a -4. Particularly this week, maybe going into game week 5 when the captaincy is really important for Mo Salah in game week 5 at home to Bournemouth. Maybe you can consider it then, but only for free, and you shouldn't be, prioritizing selling Saka this week unless it's potentially to buy Mo Salah with a free transfer. Now, the other free transfer that a lot of people to do hand in hand with that is Alexander Isak out to Joao Pedro or another cheaper forward like a Chris Wood or a Muniz at Fulham, who I still think is a decent hold. We don't actually have Muniz as one of these four, but I would still be holding on to him based on the upcoming fixtures that Fulham do have. I do still like both Alexander Isak and Gordon to an extent, but for me, Alexander Isak is a good hold still. Now, one of the other transfers that people are looking to do with selling Alexander Isak is to move to Ollie Watkins, and I definitely would not be doing that. Watkins now has Champions League starting. He's still a slight minutes concern, whereas Isak is potentially on penalties. We don't know that Watkins is. Isak is a cheaper price. The fixtures are slightly better for Watkins, but Isak has also been scoring a lot of goals during the international break as well, and Wolves away this week. Again, if it frees up money to do another transfer, then potentially do consider it, but he is not a priority sell. The other two that we've got on here in Bruno Fernandes and then Anthony Gordon as well might be slightly quicker sells, particularly Anthony Gordon. Now, it looks like the home versus away form for Anthony Gordon has been blown out of the water. He's only returned in one game so far this season, and that was the away game, whereas he blanked in the 2 home games so far this season. But again, the upcoming fixtures do look pretty nice. I've got Wolves, Fulham and Everton in 3 of the next 4. Now, Manchester City at home in game week 6 is not ideal, but I still think he's a decent enough hold. Now, if you have space to go for the likes of Diogo Jota, Luis Diaz, you want to go to a Madueke of Chelsea, a Cole Palmer, an Eze or someone like that, I do think I would probably make that transfer, but it's not a panic on Anthony Gordon at the moment. And then the final one is Bruno Fernandes, and I fall into a pretty similar place on him that I did with Eze over the past few weeks. I still think Fernandes is a solid hold, particularly going up against Southampton this week, who we've seen give away so many chances as they did to Brentford last week. So if you own Fernandes, he's definitely not a sell this week. Maybe going into game week 5 onwards where the fixtures turn a little bit, you could consider it, but he's not a sell this week. He's a definite hold, and he's still not a priority sell after this week as well. Now, just to talk about a few of those players, I think it's very obvious that Mo Salah is a good buy this week, but you do need to work around the fact that a lot of you will want Erling Haaland as well, and I still think a team structure for the long term, owning both of them, is quite difficult to build to. It's not the best. It works well for a couple of weeks, but over the long period, I still don't think it's the best when you're only going to captain one of them for a certain number of weeks. He is scoring 14 points per 90 minutes he's on the pitch. He's returned over 2 returns per 90 minutes he's been there. And Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth at home are the reasons that lots of people are buying him, and that game week 5 captaincy that I've spoken about. So I do think Mo Salah is a great buy, and yes, I expect him to continue returning. I don't expect 14 points per 90 minutes though over the next few games. Maybe he'll get it over the next 2, and he'll continue doing well, but he's not going to match that. He's not going to get, what is that, 76 returns in this FPL season if he was to play every single game. That is just never going to happen, right? So he's going to have to slow down at some point. I don't expect it to be over the next couple of games. I do expect him to do well. If you are considering Saka to Salah for free, I would do it. But of course, at some point, you might need to sell him again to slightly more balance out your squad. Next up is Joao Pedro, who for me at the moment is the best choice of the cheap forwards. And even when you look up to a slightly more expensive price, when you're including the likes of Muniz, Chris Wood and Visa, I still like Joao Pedro over them for the short term. Now, some of those have slightly better fixtures coming in a few weeks, but over the next 2 weeks, I do really like Joao Pedro. The returns have been slightly fortunate for him, I would say that much. He had a very late winner, of course, against Manchester United. And then he scored a rebound against Arsenal where they had a red card in game week 3 as well. So slightly fortunate to get the returns. But the positive thing is we expect him to be on penalties and he's playing 90 minutes, which is not something we necessarily thought. There is, of course, a big debate about the fact that he's gone to Brazil. They do play one more match, which I think you'll know the result of by the time of upload, but I don't know at time recording. Even if he plays as a substitute, I fully expect him to start the game against Ipswich in game week 4. He's going to get a private jet home. And then he's going to be in training on Thursday, Friday before the match on Saturday. He might not play 90 minutes, but if he's good enough to start the game, he should be able to get some returns against that Ipswich side. So at his price, just because his price has increased slightly, I wouldn't be put off. I still really like him as a cheap option. So just to add that in a little bit more context to some of the Brighton attackers, I really like Joao Pedro and I would go with him over Danny Welbeck. Just the minutes that we are seeing Joao Pedro get of 90s and he is likely on penalties, I still like him as an option over Danny Welbeck as a better longer term pick. Moving into midfield, Mitoma is your nailed option. He's likely to play every game. They don't have Europe. He's more nailed. Those minutes are just slightly more secure. And even when he's on the pitch, the returns feel slightly better. You're going to get what you pay for a Mitoma over the likes of Minte or an Adingra as well. Now, the reason Adingra is in here is he's not a buy. You definitely shouldn't be looking to buy him because he's not started a game yet. But I think he will offer competition for Minte when there is a slight increase in the amount of fixtures that you could go and that they have. So Minte is a great cheap option if you can't afford all the way up to Mitoma. I do think Mitoma is worth the money over Minte just for security of minutes, slight sort of security in your mind that you know you're going to get it. But I do not mind Minte that much. I do think there'll be a slight regression in terms of the amount of minutes. I think he's played, apart from the first game where he got subbed off, 90 minutes in every game. I don't expect that so much when they have other players coming back from injury as well. Joao Pedro is definitely number one. Mitoma is definitely number one in terms of midfielders. I probably would just go Joao Pedro over Welbeck because the budget is the same. And if you want a cheap option, I don't mind Minte. Next up, having a look at the Chelsea attackers. So, of course, Cole Palmer is the obvious one that you should be going and buying. If you've got the money to go and do it, the next 5 fixtures do still look really, really nice for Chelsea. And I think Palmer will continue to do well. He is so focal to what Chelsea are doing. Playing in that number 10 role, he's linking really well with Jackson, Madueke and Neto. That looks like our first choice front 4 that we are putting together at the moment for Chelsea. So he's on penalties, he's getting assists, he's scoring goals. At 10.5 million, up to 10.6 now, I think he's a really, really strong buy. Now, I would probably just about favour going with Mo Salah over him for the next 4 games. But after that, maybe when you're not going to captain the likes of Mo Salah, Palmer might offer a little bit of better value than Salah when you take captaincy out of the equation. Now, if you're not going to go with Palmer, Madueke is the next best option for me. He's slightly more direct. He's proven slightly more in terms of goal scoring than Neto has. But I expect those two to be the first choice wingers. I would probably pick Madueke over Neto at the moment. And just because he didn't return in the last game, Madueke's data has been fantastic and I still expect returns for him. I actually do quite like Jackson as a pick up front. We didn't sign a Osimhen or an Ivan Toney. There isn't that much competition in terms of out and out forwards. Joao Felix will get minutes, but I still expect Jackson to be starting games and he's been pretty good. I think 2 goals and an assist so far this season for him as well. The only reason why Nkunku is in here, just if anyone still owns him, he is just a sell. I don't expect that many minutes. I expect him to play a lot in the Europa Conference League and not that much in the Premier League. So Palmer, if you've got the budget, is great. Madueke, probably my second favourite pick, then Jackson, and then Pedro Neto. Next up in midfield, as a slight bit of a differential actually, is Jarrod Bowen. The opening few fixtures for West Ham were not great, but they do start to look a little bit better. And he's been pretty good in terms of returns, 15 points with a goal and an assist so far this season, despite a few difficult opening fixtures. Fulham, Brentford and Ipswich, along with Chelsea at home in the next 4, which you can definitely play him in. Looks like a really, really nice run for him. And he's an absolute big differential. Almost no one is talking about him. I don't see him in virtually any videos or any bits of content being put out. So he is competing with the likes of Jota and Diaz and Eze, who are a similar price, who I probably would buy over Bowen. But if you are one that likes a bit of a differential, I think he's probably my number one at just 5.9% owned. Of course, they have no Europe this season, so we just are going to see West Ham and Bowen focusing on the Premier League, focusing on their match once a week, which of course did hamper them last season when they were playing in the Europa League. But we're not going to see that this year. And with the next 4 fixtures, I do think he could offer a really nice differential option. You could look at the likes of Kudus. You could have a look at the likes of Areola in goal. You could have a look at the likes of Emerson. Some of the other defenders like Wan-Bissaka in there as well. I do think West Ham are being slightly underlooked with the fixtures they have over the next 4 weeks. Next up is the Aston Villa defence. And I'm actually re-recording this very specific section if everything looks a little bit and the lighting's a little bit different or the sound or something. Because Ezri Konsa was the one I recommended when I first recorded this video along with Pau Torres, and he's now picked up a slight knock on Tuesday evening playing for England. So Ezri Konsa, if he gets cleared in the press conference on Friday, is still the one that I'd recommend, but right now he's a yellow flag, so there is absolutely no reason anyone should be buying him until we hear a little bit more from the manager on Friday. In terms of the 4 million options, we did think Nedeljkovic would be the one that would fill in the absence of Matty Cash, with Bogard being the one at 4 million who's actually played at centre-back, whilst Konsa has been the one that's filled in at right-back. Now, of course, there's a lot of moving parts now, because if Konsa is likely to miss a couple of games, then Nedeljkovic will likely play at right-back and fill in with Bogard being centre-back along with Pau Torres. Now, we also don't quite know what's going to happen at left-back, because with Champions League starting, they have Maatsen and Luca Dean. Dean has played a lot of minutes in pre-season, and I expect him to continue to do so, because Maatsen has a lot of Champions League experience, as we saw with Borussia Dortmund last year, actually reaching the Champions League final, and Maatsen was part of that team. So my prediction actually is Maatsen to play the Champions League and Luca Dean to play the Premier League. But if you can wait, I would wait until game week 5 once we see a little bit more, because we've seen rotation from Aston Villa in the fullback areas in European competitions before. So for me, the safest options, of course, is going with Martinez in goal if you want to do that. Konsa and Pau Torres are the other two. Pau Torres is safer now with Konsa being a slight yellow flag, but if Konsa is cleared, then he is definitely the safest. Of course, Konsa might miss a game or 2 if he is out. We are completely unawares at the moment. It sounds like a slight knee injury. You might be able to get a couple of games out of the 4 million options, but generally at the moment, I wouldn't buy Dean. I wouldn't buy the 4 million options, and I probably wouldn't buy Konsa until we hear anything guaranteed. So suddenly, it just looks like Pau Torres is the one to go for. And finally, having a look at a few players to monitor, who I know some of you are considering buying this week that I'm not 100% certain on going into game week 4. The first of all is Ollie Watkins. Of course, they've got Champions League coming up, and the minutes have not been there, and the finishing has not been fantastic. There is part of me that wonders once Champions League starts, we might see a start every so often. I'm not saying every game, but we might see Duran get a few more minutes given how good he's been for them at the start of the season. I wouldn't be buying Ollie Watkins. I know some of you might fancy taking a punt and go for it, but I wouldn't be selling a Havertz and Isak to be going and buying Ollie Watkins. Next up is Rico Lewis at Manchester City. The buy window for Lewis, for me, has massively passed. Brentford at home this week is great, but then it's Arsenal, then it's Newcastle. Game week 7, you could reconsider it, but then we're fully into Champions League season, and Kyle Walker will be massively back, fit and available. We just don't know what's going to happen with Premier League, Champions League for Lewis versus Walker in terms of minutes. So if you haven't bought Lewis yet, I don't think I'd be buying him for 4.7 now. A similar thing comes in for Brian Mbeumo at Brentford, 7.1 million, but the next couple of games are not ideal. Game week 6, he'll be incredibly popular. And those of you on wildcard 6, he's almost an absolute lock to go and buy, but I'm not sure I'll be buying him this week with the next couple of fixtures. And the final one is Semenyo at Bournemouth. We see a similar thing in terms of the fixtures not being great, but the underlying data does look really nice. If I was on wildcard this week or even looking for a player at that price, I would consider him as the best long-term option. Short term, you can still look at Smith Rowe, you can look at Minte, who we've already spoken about, but as a long-term buy, when it comes to a game week 6 wildcard or something, I think Semenyo will be the most popular one based off what we've seen so far this season, and his data has actually been really, really good. So what we've actually seen is we've spoken about a few players to definitely go and buy, a few discussion points, and actually a few players that lots of you are selling that maybe you shouldn't go and sell already, like Saka and Isak, despite those being the players that I've already sold. We'll discuss all of that in my team selection video, which will be out for you tomorrow morning. If you are looking for more content, the new episode of my podcast, Know the Score, has been released as well. It is on my page. I'll put a link above and in the description as well if you want to go and check that out. No more from me. Slightly longer video as always, these ones. I hope you are enjoying the international break. FPL is almost back. We are just 3 days away from FPL being back. We are fully in the swing of it. So you can dust off those cobwebs, get your FPL team back and running, start making some transfers if you haven't already. Any questions about those transfers or your team, about FPL, drop it all in the comment section down below. As always, the first 30 minutes of every video, I do my best to answer every single one of those questions. And then, of course, any after that I can do as well. So do turn on notifications so you can get your questions in the first 30 seconds as well. Thank you so much for watching. 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here. And I'll be back again very soon.